Welcome to the Undercover Insights channel. Today I'm going to tell you about the story a racist cop targets an innocent black man in the park until he discovers who he really is. But when the FBI agent fights back, the officer's lies ignite a firestorm. Now, a group of fearless seniors risk everything to expose the truth. Will justice win, or is the system too broken to save? Liberty Park buzzed with the hum of cicadas as the summer sun blazed down at 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Elijah Carter, a 45-year-old black man with streaks of gray in his hair, sat on a weathered bench near the playground. His FBI badge lay hidden in his coat pocket, buried beneath a dog-eared copy of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. He'd come here every Thursday for months, seeking solace after undercover stings that left him questioning humanity. Today, though, the park felt different. A group of children squealed as they chased ice cream trucks 50 yards away. An elderly white couple shuffled past Elijah, clutching each other's arms and whispering. Elijah nodded politely, but the woman tightened her grip on her purse. He sighed, turning back to his book. "You don't belong here." The words on the page seemed to mock him. Officer Frank Mullins, 58, squinted through his patrol car window, his knuckles whitening around the steering wheel. The South Side had been his beat for 30 years, and he knew its rhythms like the back of his hand. Gang tags on dumpsters, drug deals in alleyways, and suspicious types like the man on the bench. "Too clean for this neighborhood," Frank muttered, eyeing Elijah's pressed slacks and leather loafers. His radio crackled. "All units, report of a stolen wallet near Liberty Park. Suspect, black male, 6 feet 2 inches, medium build." Frank grinned. "Got you." He stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt so his holster gleamed in the sunlight. Elijah felt the officer's stare before he saw him. Years of training kicked in, steady breaths, hands visible, no sudden moves. He kept reading as Frank's shadow fell over him. "Afternoon," Frank said, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" Elijah looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Reading, officer. It's a public park." Frank's boot nudged the bench, rattling Elijah's book. "Funny place to read. You live around here?" "Does it matter?" Frank's jaw tightened. "Let's cut the crap. Stand up, slowly." Elijah closed his book, marking the page with a receipt. "Am I under arrest?" Frank's hand hovered near his baton. "You will be if you don't cooperate." A crowd gathered, teenagers filming on phones, mothers pulling children closer. Elijah stood, towering over Frank by 4 inches. "I'm just sitting here," he said, voice calm but firm. Frank's face reddened. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Elijah complied, his muscles tense. The cuffs clicked shut, biting into his wrists. "You people think you own everything," Frank hissed, low enough for only Elijah to hear. As Frank marched Elijah toward the patrol car, a teenager shouted, "Leave him alone!" Frank spun around, shoving the kid backward. Elijah lunged instinctively to block him, and Frank's baton cracked against his ribs. Elijah gasped, doubling over. His FBI badge clattered to the pavement. Frank froze. "FBI!" He kicked the badge under the car. "You think that scares me? You're all the same." Blood trickled from Elijah's lip as Frank shoved him into the back seat. The crowd erupted. Someone screamed, "Police brutality!" Frank revved the engine, drowning them out. Elijah stared at the fading playground through the window. This isn't over. The fluorescent lights of Chicago's 12th precinct buzzed like angry wasps as Elijah Carter slumped in a cold metal chair, his cuffed wrists chafing against the interrogation room table. The air smelled of stale coffee and bleach, a nauseating combination that did little to mask the metallic tang of blood drying on his split lip. Across the room, Officer Frank Mullins leaned against the wall, his arms crossed and his eyes narrowed into slits. A flickering security camera watched silently from the corner, its red light blinking like a warning. "Let's try this again," Frank said, slamming a file on the table. "Elijah Carter, 45, no prior arrests. Too clean." He circled the table, his boots echoing like gunshots. "You're either a saint or a liar. Which is it?" Elijah stared at the two-way mirror, imagining Captain Margaret Hayes watching from the other side. She knows she has to. His ribs throbbed where Frank's baton had struck him, but he kept his voice steady. "I want a lawyer." Frank smirked, leaning in until his badge hovered inches from Elijah's face. "Lawyers are for citizens. You're just another thug who got lucky." He flipped open the file, revealing a grainy photo of Liberty Park. "Assaulting an officer, resisting arrest. You'll rot in Cook County for decades." Elijah's jaw tightened. There were witnesses. Cameras. Cameras malfunction. Frank shrugged. Witnesses. Well, folks get confused. He pulled a pen from his pocket and tossed it at Elijah. "Sign the confession, and maybe I'll forget the drug charge." "Drug charge?" Elijah laughed bitterly. "You planted that too?" Frank's fist slammed the table, rattling the pen. "You think this is a game? I've buried better men than you." Spittle flew from his lips. "Sign the paper." Elijah leaned back, his chains clinking. "Go to hell." Captain Margaret Hayes stood in the observation room, her reflection fractured in the one-way glass. The security footage from Liberty Park played on a loop on the monitor beside her. Elijah's arrest, the badge skidding under the patrol car, Frank's boot kicking it into the shadows. She'd watched it 7 times. "You're just like him," Elijah had hissed when she'd ordered him processed. She'd pretended not to hear. Her radio crackled. "Captain, media's outside. They're asking about the FBI agent." Margaret silenced it. Frank had been her partner once, back when the job felt simple. Good guys, bad guys, no in-between. Now the lines blurred like ink in rain. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out Elijah's FBI badge, its golden shield smeared with mud. Frank had found it in the evidence room an hour ago, his grin sharp as a knife. "Lost property," he'd said. "Probably fake." But Margaret knew better. She'd called the bureau twice. Both times she'd hung up before the dial tone ended. Back in the interrogation room, Frank dropped a plastic bag on the table. Inside was a small vial of white powder. "Guess what we found in your coat?" Elijah's stomach turned. "That's not mine." "Says every junkie in Chicago." Frank uncuffed one of Elijah's wrists, forcing his hand toward the bag. "Fingerprints don't lie." Elijah jerked free. "Touch me again and I'll—" Frank grabbed his collar, slamming his head against the mirror. The glass shuddered. "You'll what?" "Cry to your FBI buddies. They'll deny you ever existed." Elijah's vision blurred. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the door creak open. "Enough, Frank." Captain Hayes stood in the doorway, her face pale. "Get out." Frank released Elijah with a shove. "Your funeral, Cap." The room fell silent. Margaret tossed a towel to Elijah. "Clean yourself up." Elijah dabbed his lip, the fabric staining red. "You gonna pretend this didn't happen too?" Margaret avoided his gaze. "Sign the confession. I'll make sure you get a deal. 6 months? Maybe less?" Elijah laughed hoarsely. "You know I'm innocent." "Innocent?" Margaret's voice rose. "You think that matters? Frank's got half the precinct in his pocket. Judges, lawyers, you can't win this." Elijah stood, his chains clattering. "Then why'd you keep my badge?" Margaret froze. "You found it," Elijah pressed. "You know what he is, what you are." For a moment, Margaret's mask slipped, a flicker of shame, quickly buried. "The badge proves nothing. It could have been stolen." Elijah leaned forward, his eyes burning. "Or maybe you're just too scared to admit the truth." Margaret turned toward the door. The offer stands until midnight. The holding cell reeked of urine and despair. Elijah slumped on a concrete bench, his ribs screaming with every breath. Through the barred window, he watched protesters gather outside, mostly seniors, their handmade signs trembling in the wind. Justice for Elijah. End police brutality. A rookie officer, barely 21, slid a tray of cold mashed potatoes through the slot. They said you're FBI. Elijah didn't look up. What do you think? The rookie hesitated, glancing at the security camera. My granddaddy was at Selma. He said cops are supposed to protect people. He lowered his voice. The footage, it's still on the server. Backup files. Elijah met his eyes. Why tell me? The rookie shrugged. Granddaddy also said silence is violence. He walked away, whistling nervously. Elijah stared at the tray, a plan forming. Midnight, 6 hours. At 11:30 p.m., Frank returned, reeking of whiskey. He unlocked the cell, his gun conspicuously loose in its holster. Last chance, agent. Sign the paper. Elijah stood slowly. Or what? You'll shoot me? Stage another accident? Frank's fist connected with Elijah's jaw, sending him crashing into the wall. You think you're special? I've buried a dozen of you, fathers, brothers. Nobody cares. Elijah spat blood, grinning. They will. Frank drew his gun, pressing the barrel to Elijah's temple. You're dead either way. A shout echoed down the hall. Officer Mullins, Captain wants you, now. Frank cursed, holstering his weapon. Midnight, Carter. Then you're mine. Elijah wiped his mouth as Frank stormed away. Number, then you're ours. Officer Daniel Rivera, 22, sat hunched in the precinct's dimly lit server room, his grandfather's pocket watch ticking loudly in his trembling hand. The relic engraved. For Justice, 1965, had been a gift after his grandfather's march in Selma. On the computer screen, the unedited Liberty Park footage played. Frank's baton cracking against Elijah's ribs, the FBI badge skidding into shadows, the crowd screams. Daniel's finger hovered over the delete key. Silence is violence. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. He plugged in a USB drive, its blue light blinking like a heartbeat. The file transfer bar inched forward, 87%, 92%, 99%. A door creaked down the hall. Daniel yanked the drive free, stuffing it into his sock just as Sergeant Mackey lumbered past the room, coffee in hand. Late night, kid, Mackey grunted. Just paperwork, Daniel stammered, pulse roaring. Mackey squinted. Better hurry. Captain's on the warpath. At 6:15 a.m., veteran reporter Diane Carmichael, 68, sipped lukewarm chamomile tea in the Chicago Tribune newsroom. Her arthritic fingers scrolled through anonymous tip emails until one subject line froze her. Cops lie. Proof inside. The attached video loaded. Diane's breath caught. She'd covered police scandals since the 80s, but this, the brutality, the badge kicked aside, felt personal. Her late husband, a black teacher, had been stopped 7 times for looking suspicious. She called her editor. Print the front page and get me Reverend Lawson at New Horizons Senior Center now. By noon, 300 seniors gathered outside the 12th precinct, their canes and walkers forming a fragile barricade. Reverend May Lawson, 71, stood on a makeshift stage, her voice amplified by a battery-powered megaphone. They think we're too old to fight. Let's show 'em how freedom roars. The crowd erupted, signs painted with, I marched in 65, I'll march again, and Honor Elijah, bobbed above gray heads. Among them was Walter Jenkins, 82, clutching a photo of his grandson, shot by police in 2012. Ain't burying another one, he muttered, tears cutting through wrinkles. Across the street, Frank leaned against his patrol car, chewing nicotine gum. "Look at these geriatrics," he sneered to Mackie. "Should have retired when they mattered." Frank's wife, Linda, 60, watched the news in their cramped living room, her knitting needles clattering to the floor. The footage played again. Her husband's snarl, Elijah's blood. The phone rang. Their daughter, Emily, a pre-law student at Howard University. "Mom, tell me it's not true. Dad's a monster." Linda stared at the wedding photo on the mantel. Frank, young and smiling, pinning a corsage to her prom dress. "He saved me," he'd whispered that night after chasing off a gang. Now, the memory curdled. She drove to the precinct, her '98 Buick rattling past the protests. Linda found Frank in the parking garage, smoking beside his squad car. "You lied to me," she said, voice trembling. 40 years, you said you protected people." Frank flicked his cigarette. "I did, from animals like—" "Our granddaughter is black, Frank," Linda's shout echoed off concrete. Emily's biracial toddler beamed from her phone wallpaper. "You think they'll spare her?" Frank's fist smashed the car hood. "You're hysterical. Go home." Linda threw her wedding ring at his feet. It clinked into a storm drain. Lost. Captain Hayes stood at her office window, watching the protests swell. Diane Carmichael's article lay open on her desk. "Corruption and Courage, the Seniors Who Won't Stay Silent." A knock. Daniel Rivera entered, pale but resolute. "Captain, I have something." He placed the USB drive beside Elijah's mud-caked badge. Hayes's hands shook as she plugged it in. The raw footage played. Frank's boot stomping the badge, his whisper, "You're all the same." Daniel cleared his throat. "My granddad used to say, bad men win when good cops do nothing." Hayes closed her eyes. "Promotion hearings next week. Pension 6 months away." She picked up the phone. "Get me the FBI." In his cell, Elijah traced a crack in the wall, counting minutes. The protests' chants seeped through the barred window. No justice, no peace. The rookie officer slid a newspaper through the slot. Elijah's face stared back, the headline bold. FBI agent framed. Public demands answers. A key turned. Captain Hayes stood in the doorway, shadows under her eyes. "It's over," she said. "Your team's raiding the precinct at dawn." Elijah stood slowly. "Why now?" Hayes nodded toward the window, where Walter Jenkins led seniors in We Shall Overcome. "They reminded me what this badge should mean." Rain lashed the 12th Precinct's parking lot at 4:58 a.m., the sky a bruised purple. Inside, Captain Margaret Hayes clutched Elijah's FBI badge like a rosary, her desk lamp casting long shadows over the resignation letter she hadn't yet signed. A distant rumble shook the windows, not thunder, but engines. 6 black SUVs skidded into the lot, their headlights slicing through the dark. "FBI! Everyone on the ground!" Agents in tactical gear stormed the precinct, their boots echoing like drumbeats. Officers froze mid-donut, hands raised. Sergeant Mackey lunged for his desk drawer, but an agent pinned him down, cuffs snapping. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." Hayes stood in her doorway, trembling. Agent Torres, a no-nonsense woman with a silver bob, marched toward her. "Captain Hayes, you're to surrender all records related to Elijah Carter and Frank Mullins." Hayes handed over the USB drive, her voice hollow. "It's all there." Frank Mullins woke to his phone blaring, Linda's final text. "Emily and I are safe. Don't look for us." He hurled the phone against his motel wall, shattering the screen. The TV flickered. Breaking FBI raid at 12th Precinct. Officers implicated in framing agent. "Traitors," Frank spat, stuffing cash and a Glock into a duffel bag. He'd planned for this. A stash of burner phones, a rusty Ford pickup parked behind the motel. Rain soaked his uniform as he peeled onto the highway, windshield wipers screeching. A mile ahead, brake lights glowed red. Roadwork. Detour. Damn it! He swerved onto an exit ramp, tires skidding. Elijah leaned against an FBI van, watching his old precinct burn with activity. Agent Torres handed him a coffee. "We found the drugs Mullins planted, labs confirming fingerprints now." Elijah stared at the storm. "He'll run." "We've got BOLOS out. He won't get far." A rookie agent sprinted over, radio crackling. "Squad car spotted a pickup matching Mullins' plate, headed west on I-90. Elijah grabbed the radio. "I'm coming." Torres blocked him. "You're a civilian now, Carter." He flashed a grim smile. "Then deputize me." Frank's pickup fishtailed on the muddy back road, headlights illuminating a weathered sign. "Dead end. Bridge out." He slammed the brakes, skidding to a halt, inches from the collapsed overpass. Below, the Chicago River churned, swollen with rain. Tires screeched behind him. Elijah stepped from an SUV, silhouetted by flashing red and blues. "Stay back!" Frank waved his Glock, voice raw. "I'll jump!" Elijah raised empty hands. "You're not a killer, Frank, not yet." Frank's laugh bordered on hysterical. "You think you know me? I kept this city clean, sacrificed everything." "By terrorizing innocent people?" Elijah inched closer. "Your wife left you. Your daughter hates you. Was it worth it?" Frank's finger tightened on the trigger. "I'd do it all again." A shot rang out. Frank crumpled, clutching his thigh. Agent Torres lowered her smoking rifle. "Suspect neutralized." Elijah lunged as Frank rolled toward the edge. "Don't." Their hands met, a split-second grip, before Frank's weight dragged them both over. Elijah's free hand caught a rusted rebar, tendons screaming. Frank dangled above the rapids, Elijah's arm the only thread holding him. "Why?" Frank roared. Elijah gritted his teeth. "Because I'm not you." Frank's eyes widened, not fear, but fury. "You weak, pathetic." He let go. Elijah watched him vanish into the torrent, the river swallowing Frank's curses. Agent Torres hauled him up, her grip steady. "You okay?" Elijah stared at his shaking hands. "Yeah." By dawn, the precinct swarmed with news vans. Captain Hayes stood at her desk, polishing her badge one last time. The resignation letter waited, signed. Agent Torres entered, holding a file. "Mullins' body hasn't been found, presumed dead." Hayes nodded. "And the others?" "Charges filed against 12 officers. The seniors' protest forced the mayor's hand. Full audit of the department." Hayes slid her badge across the desk. "Tell Carter. Tell him I'm sorry." Torres pocketed the badge. "Tell him yourself." Outside, Elijah stood with the protesters, Walter Jenkins clasping his shoulder. Hayes approached, rain matting her hair. "I'm resigning," she said. "The system's rotten. I just stopped noticing." Elijah studied her. "What'll you do now?" She glanced at Walter's sign. "Justice has no expiration date." "Help them," she said, "if they'll let me." That night, Elijah stood on the broken overpass, Frank's Glock heavy in his hand. He'd fished it from the riverbank, the serial number filed off. A ghost gun. "You're all the same," Frank had sneered. Elijah hurled the gun into the water. "Number we're not." In the distance, the city glowed, its shadows a little lighter. The Cook County Courthouse buzzed like a shaken hornet's nest. Elijah Carter sat at the plaintiff's table, his navy suit straining over bandaged ribs. Across the aisle, 12 indicted officers, Sergeant Mackey among them, slouched in wrinkled uniforms, their lawyers muttering over plea deals. But the gallery stole the scene. Rows of seniors in Sunday best, their canes and hearing aids testament to decades of silent stories. Judge Margaret Wilkins, 74, a no-nonsense black woman with a cataract-clouded eye, slammed her gavel. This court seeks truth, not theatrics. Proceed. Prosecutor Diane Carmichael, formerly of the Chicago Tribune, stood, her cane tapping like a metronome. The people call Walter Jenkins. Walter, 82, shuffled to the stand, his grandson's photo clutched to his chest. Diane gentled her voice. Mr. Jenkins, describe the night your grandson, Marcus, died. Walter's knuckles whitened. Cops said he had a gun. Only thing in his hands was a sandwich. He glared at Mackey. That man laughed when they zipped the body bag. Mackey sneered. Objection. Relevance? Judge Wilkins leaned forward. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Jenkins. Marcus dreamed of being a teacher, Walter rasped. Now I teach his boy to fear cops. The gallery erupted. A woman hurled her orthopedic shoe at Mackey. Murderer. Elijah took the stand, Frank Mullen's ghost haunting his pauses. Diane played the precinct footage, Frank's baton, the kicked badge, the seniors' protests. Defense attorney Collins, a slick-haired vulture, pounced. You provoked Officer Mullins, didn't you? Refused orders? Elijah's voice hardened. My order was reading a book. Collins smirked. Yet you retired after this incident. Guilty conscience? Diane slammed her cane. Objection. Withdrawn. Collins tossed photos of Elijah's bloody lip on the jury box. No further questions. The jury, 8 seniors, 4 middle-aged, stared at Elijah. Juror number 6, a white grandmother, wiped her eyes. After 11 hours, the jury returned. Juror number 6 clutched a handkerchief. Judge Wilkins read the verdict. Count 1, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Guilty. Count 2, falsifying evidence. Guilty. Count 3. Mackey cursed, lunging at Elijah. Bailiffs tackled him as cameras flashed. In the chaos, Walter pressed Marcus's photo to Mackey's face. See him? See him! Elijah knelt beside Diane. It's not enough. She gripped his hand. But it's a start. Stateville Correctional Center reeked of bleach and regret. Frank Mullins, now inmate number 47,328, hunched in the visitor's room, his orange jumpsuit hanging loose. A scar from the river crash bisected his cheek. Elijah sat across the plexiglass. Your daughter sent a letter. Frank's eyes lit, hope, hunger, as Elijah read aloud. Dear Dad, I named my son Elijah. May he never know you. Frank spat. You think you've won? I'm a martyr here. Guards, inmates, they admire me. Elijah slid photos under the glass. Linda and Emily at a protest. Captain Hayes painting over gang tags with seniors. The world's moving on, Frank. You're just noise. Frank's fist cracked the barrier. I'll outlive you! A guard dragged him away, his screams fading. I'm still here. Elijah stood in Liberty Park's rebuilt playground, now dotted with community unity murals. Teenagers, black, white, Latino, painted over graffiti under Captain Hayes' supervision. A boy, 14, approached. Mr. Carter, I'm Marcus Jenkins. Grandpa says you're teaching a class. Elijah handed him a copy of The Fire Next Time. Every Thursday, bring your friends. Marcus flipped to a dog-eared page. This line, people trapped in history and history trapped in them. What's it mean? Elijah watched Hayes help seniors plant daffodils where Frank's patrol car once parked. It means we carry the past, but we don't have to repeat it. Frank collapsed in the prison yard, clutching his chest. Inmates circled, jeering as guards strolled over. Heart attack? One laughed. Nah, dude's faking. Frank gasped, clawing at the photo of baby Elijah hidden in his sock. The world dimmed. Linda's prom dress, Emily's first steps, a badge shining. His last breath fogged the air, a silent curse. 1 year later, Elijah sat on Liberty Park's bench, now engraved, For Those Who Fought. Diane Carmichael dozed beside him, her Pulitzer, Exposing Corruption in Blue, warming her lap. Marcus jogged over, college acceptance letter in hand. Howard University, pre-law. Elijah smiled. Your granddad? Marcus nodded toward Walter, teaching toddlers civil rights songs. Says he's got more marches left. Diane stirred, squinting at the sunset. Ever miss the FBI? Elijah watched Hayes, now a community director, laugh with teens. Nope, this is better. The park echoed with generations weaving a new story, its threads unbroken. Liberty Park hummed with life under a golden autumn sky, the once chipped bench now polished and engraved with the names of those who'd fought for its peace. Elijah Carter, his hair fully silvered, leaned back as children's laughter echoed from the new playground, a mosaic of intergenerational murals depicting hands clasped across race and age. Beside him, Margaret Hayes, her police badge replaced by a volunteer lanyard, chuckled as a group of teens repainted a faded "Justice" sign, their brushes dripping with defiant crimson. Walter Jenkins, 83, held court at the picnic tables, teaching wide-eyed kids civil rights hymns. Grandpa says this park's got ghosts, whispered Marcus, Walter's great-grandson, now a lanky high schooler. Elijah handed him a weathered copy of The Fire Next Time. Ghosts remind us what matters, he said, nodding to the plaque honoring Frank Mullen's victims. Lest we forget. A breeze carried the scent of rosemary from the community garden, where seniors and teens planted bulbs side by side. Diane Carmichael, Pulitzer displayed at the senior center, napped nearby, her cane hooked over the bench. As dusk painted the sky tangerine, Elijah watched a young girl trace the bench's engravings. "Who's Elijah Carter?" she asked. Margaret smiled. "Someone who believed we could do better." The park, once a battleground, thrummed with the quiet certainty of hard-won hope, a testament to those who refuse to let hate have the last word. Shadows of Authority offers timeless lessons about justice, resilience, and community. 1. Systemic injustice demands reform. Racism and abuse of power are rooted in flawed systems, not just individuals. Lasting change requires policy shifts like stronger police oversight and anti-bias training. 2. Prejudice breeds violence. Frank's racial profiling of Elijah shows how dehumanizing stereotypes fuel harm. Combating bias in ourselves and institutions is critical. 3. Intergenerational solidarity drives progress. Seniors, wisdom, and youth energy unite for change. Walter's stories of the past guide Marcus' fight for the future. 4. Moral courage requires sacrifice. Elijah and Hayes risked careers and safety to do what's right. Standing against injustice often means personal loss. 5. Healing through collective action, liberty. Park transforms from a site of trauma to hope via murals, gardens, and shared efforts. 6. Legacy lies in daily acts. Small choices, like Elijah mentoring Marcus or Hayes volunteering, build justice over time. 7. Persistent hope. Wins. The seniors' protests seemed futile at first, but perseverance sparked accountability. 8. Ethical leadership. Demands humility. Hayes's redemption came from surrendering power to serve others, proving leadership means accountability. The story reminds us that justice is a journey. While systems of hate run deep, collective action, big or small, can dismantle oppression and rebuild communities rooted in empathy. Subscribe Undercover Insights channel for more meaningful and inspiring stories.